Hey everybody. Couple of things. We're going to do a quick 20, maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes on Magic Realism Life of Pi Part 1. Uh, Another one next week on Friday. But I got a couple emails just about marks and stuff coming back. I'm going to do my best to get a bunch of it back to you. I've got some of it going right now. I apologize for the wait. I broke my computer, so that's been a bit of a trick. So hopefully I'll be able to get out from under the stuff that you've sent me, get it all back to you and marked. Marks are only going up, and I expect them to be pretty high by the end. And I just want to thank you for your patience and for your hard work in this kind of during this whole time. Yeah, so let's get to today's little talk, and I'll have some of that stuff back to you as soon as I can. Okay. All right. So there's a kind of a picture from the film Life of Pi. Um, Here we go. So Life of Pi Magic Realism 1. Today we're going to talk about two things: the average Joe kind of factor, and the other factor being the fractured kind of circular narrative. So, first part it's a tricky part. Just a reminder that the author's note is part of the story. It's not really like a typical author's note where they thank their publisher and talk about writing the book and this kind of thing. It is both true and real in real life sense, and also fiction. So because Yann Martel blends reality with this fiction, he is both the writer and a character in this book. So throughout the book, the parts in italic are Martel, the character, kind of talking or writing. So this author's note is mostly fiction. Like, there is no Mama G, there's no Francis Adi Rubasami. But he thanks at the end, he thanks Moacir Silar, and that's a real person. He was a writer. He wrote a book called Max and the Cats about a man escaping Nazi Germany. His boat sinks, and he's trapped on like a boat or a dinghy or a escape life raft with a jaguar. So a little bit similar to Life of Pi, like the concept, but they're very different. There was a controversy when Martel won the Booker Prize that this book was kind of plagiarized, but most people who have read both said that's ridiculous. They're just so different. Other than this sort of one plot concept, but they're both so different that there's no real, this is not like just copying. And then in the author's note too, he suggests he claims that he had a book set in Portugal that he had to throw away. And interestingly, Martel eventually did write a book set in Portugal, the High Mountains of Portugal, in 2016. I haven't read it, but yeah, so he did write a book, at least with Portugal in the title. Okay, so the average Joe. So here's the actor who played the adult Pi. So sadly, this gentleman, who is also a really large star in Bollywood, he passed away just a couple of weeks ago. So if you see the film, it's a wonderful film. You should definitely check it out. It's different than the book, but it's totally worth watching. The adult Pi at the beginning of the story, the grown-up Pi, he definitely is just sort of ordinary, average Joe Schmo. He is, I think he's an academic. I'm not really sure about his job per se, but I think he's like an academic, maybe working at a university, that kind of thing, because he is both a zoologist and a religious scholar. But we don't really know what his job is. He is a typical immigrant family man in Canada, living in Scarborough, and he's a great cook, but he hoards food. That's on page 25. So all the little page numbers there I've included about just the average Joe kind of things. He has a sense of humor. Martel says that he likes spicy food. So Pi feeds Martel spicy food, which tortures his stomach like a boa constrictor that has swallowed a lawnmower. We find that out in 43. He also has two kids, a teenage son and a 4-year-old daughter, and a wife who Martel tells us is a pharmacist. So we just know that he's kind of like the typical sort of immigrant Canadian family man. All right, so a typical average guy. that's kind of like part of what these magic realist stories are. They're not, you don't get like, it's not about kings and queens and, secret agents and all that kind of stuff. It's sort of typical people. So the fractured circular narrative part. It's a bit of a mystery, this story, in that we know, but at the same time we know the ending at the start. We know the pie survives. At the end of the first part of the book, part 1 of the book, after Martel meets the children, he goes, he says this story has a happy ending. 99, page 99. We know that that the end of the story, by the end of the first third of the book, is going to end happily, but we don't know what happens in the middle. Right, and this is kind of it's interesting that the middle part of the story is kind of the most important. We hear about Richard Parker right at the beginning, although we have no idea that he is a tiger. He says, Richard Parker has stayed with me. I've never forgotten him. 6. So we don't really know about that initially. Who he we could probably think Richard Parker is a person and don't realize that he's a tiger. So there's lots of heavy foreshadowing and a lot of things that we come back to later that change the way we kind of understand what we've already read. So the biggest thing is part 3, and in part 3 we get to the end of part 2 and Pi is completely done telling his story. He goes, and there my story ends, on page 286. But we recall that the narrator, Jan Martel, the character, at the start, he tells us in the prologue, or the author's note, that he received a tape and a report from the Japanese Minister of Transport. And he says, it was as I listened to this tape that I agreed with Mr. Adi Rubasamy that this was indeed a story to make you believe in God. So, he also at the start he thanks in the author's note, he thanks a Japanese diplomat, an employee of the shipping company, and a Japanese Minister of Transport. So it's heavy foreshadowing. It's back and forth, the beginning informing the end and the end informing the beginning. It's almost like one of those books where you finish and can reread it and be like, oh, now, right? Because there's these twists in it. So basically what the story in part 3 is, after finally landing on the beach in Mexico, Pi is taken to a hospital to recover. He's recovering in there, he's feeling better, and these Japanese officials, they come to meet with him, and they want to find out what's the reason that the boat sank. Why did this boat sink? And Pi tells them his story. He tells the same story he tells Jan Martel. So he tells the story about the tiger and about the carnivorous island, and they just reject it. They say that these Japanese officials, they say no. They reject the fantastic magic, the menagerie of animals, including the Bengal tiger. The meeting of another blind castaway when he bumps in, when the two boats bump into each other in the Pacific, and he rejects the carnivorous island. They want to hear the facts and only the facts. They don't believe any of that stuff. Okay, so they want to hear it again, and so what happens is he starts the story again. So in chapter 37, part 2, it reads like this. The ship sank. It made a sound like a monstrous metallic burp. Things bubbled at the surface and then vanished. Everything was screaming. The sea, the wind, my heart. From the lifeboat I saw something in the water. Okay. And when he starts to tell the other story to the Japanese officials, it's he starts it again. He says, the ship sank. It made a sound like a monstrous metallic burp. Things bubbled at the surface and then vanished. So it's the same thing twice, but this time it's going to be different. So they want to hear the facts, just the facts. And he starts the story again. And he says, right before he starts this, he says, you want a story that won't surprise you, that will confirm what you already know, that won't make you see higher or further or differently. You want a flat story, an immobile story. You want dry, yeastless factuality. 302. So this is something that we're going to talk about reliable narrator, the reliable narratives, and authorial reticence. We're going to talk about that next week, but it kind of goes together. The fractured, the fractured circular narrative, and whether or not we can believe what Pye's telling us. So he retells the story, just like I started off there. The ship sank. He retells it again in only 7 pages, and this time it is like pretty horrifying, the story that he tells. If you thought the animals were horrifying, this is just, it's probably, I would say it's more horrifying, this sort of 7-page story that he tells. In this story, he gets on the boat, and there's a Chinese sailor, the cook, his mother, and himself. So 4 people are on there. And the Chinese sailor has a catastrophic injury. His leg is broken, and the bone is sort of popped out. It's really quite catastrophic. They try and fix it, try and set the bone, but they're unable to keep the infection from sort of coming and taking over. And so this poor sailor, this poor Chinese sailor, he gets sicker and sicker, and he starts to get blood poisoning, and his leg starts to get gangrenous, which means that the flesh is dying. And they decide that the cook decides that they're going to have to like take this poor person's leg, and so they do. And then the mother is horrified to learn that the reason that they took the leg was not to save the sailor, but was that the cook wanted to use the sailor's foot as bait. And so the mother is horrified, and things get worse and worse on this boat with this cook, or sorry, with this cook. The Chinese sailor eventually dies, and the mother catches the cook eating part of the Chinese sailor, and the mother, of course, is horrified. Eventually, it leads to the time where the mother is killed by the cook, and it's horrifying. He kills her, and he beheads her, and he throws the head at Pye, and Pye has to sort of he's horrified by the whole thing. And what ends up happening is that Pye turns around and he kills the cook, and he eats the cook. So there are, or at least parts of the cook. So there, Pye, and this is something we'll talk about next week with hybridity. He is this sensitive religious boy who is a vegetarian, but he is also a cannibal who, you know, will eat a man's heart raw. This is part of sort of this absolutely horrifying part 3 of the book. And at the end, we're wondering, what are we to believe? And this will be part of next week's the authorial reticence part. What are we to believe? Are we to believe the story with animals, or are we to believe the short story? And that'll be part of next week's talk. So that kind of gets at like the way that the narrative doesn't just go like a regular kind of plot arc, right? The climax of the book is a transcribed tape, right, by these Japanese officials talking, and we get to hear this totally other story, and we sort of start to begin to understand the symbolic, and we'll talk about that next week, the symbolic aspect of the book. So I hope this video finds you well. Nothing really for you to do today. I'm going to give you guys your there's only 2 things left that I'm kind of thinking that we should do, and you're all doing really well. Just try your best. That's all I can ask. And number 1 thing is your health. Email me if you have any problems whatsoever. I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. I have a few emails to send out this afternoon. Yeah, two things left for the rest of May and June. One of them is not an essay. It's just an essay outline. And these talks that you can use, they'll help you with setting that up for Life of Pye and how magic realism operates in Life of Pye. All right. Thanks again, and have a great weekend. Enjoy the nice weather. Hope you can get outside and get some sun. Bye.